So I guess it just goes to show you that, you give enough grant money to the people who run this thing, they invite you to come give the talk, so that's fantastic. Because there's no way based on scholarly activity do I even match Professor Ann Martin Matthews, but it's a fantastic opportunity. Thank you very much for having me here. I always enjoy coming to University of Waterloo and visiting with the researchers that we fund through AgeWell, and honestly many of the collaborators I've had over my career, and also many of the trainees I used to have who are now here as professors at University of Waterloo. So I always enjoy the chance to come back here. I'm also proud to say that probably the last significant visit I had back here at Waterloo was back in the 90s as an engineering student when I was part of the team that stole the rigid tool from the Faculty of Engineering here. Any engineers in the crowd here? Yeah, so yeah, I had your rigid tool for a little bit and we gave it back to you guys eventually. For everyone who doesn't know what that is, you all think this is highly sexual what I'm talking about. It's not. It's actually a large wrench. That's the symbol of engineering here. And anyways, I should not have started off with that story, but we'll go there anyway. All right, let's get right into the talk. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about the area of technology and aging. And I'm really going to keep today's talk at a fairly high level and talk about where things are at, where things need to be going, and in my mind, what we need to be doing to move things forward. And so my talk is really kind of be broken into three kind of sections. So first, I'll start with the traditional introduction to the area of aging and why this area of technology and age is important. Part of that, I'll talk about, again, where the vision for technology and aging started many years ago and where we're currently at. The second part of my talk is I'll actually then talk about some technologies that are actually being developed in the AgeWell network across Canada, several of which are being developed right here at the University of Waterloo. And then the final part of my talk will kind of loop back to my introduction, and I'll talk about where I feel the field needs to go in order to actually accomplish the goals and the visions that we set out for ourselves. So I'll warn you right now, some of my statements will be a bit negative. I'm going to kind of poke a little bit at our field and really try to maybe elicit some good questions and discussion, whether after my talk or over our drink tickets in the poster session afterwards. So let's get things rolling. So again, I'm going to start with the very customary introduction. We all know this in the room. We hear this every day in the media, in the literature, and the research that obviously there's this growing issue. We call it the rising tide, the gray tsunami as that cartoon tries to show, but kind of all these buzzwords which really are meant to kind of cause fear in all of us and try for us to panic and say, oh my goodness, there's this big issue that's happening in terms of aging population. What are we going to do about it, right? So what are we going to do in terms globally of our healthcare systems that are going to be faced with this challenge of not just caring for an increasing number of older people, but number of older people that actually have some kind of disease or impairment. And this is, in my mind, is one of the more significant changes we're seeing. As people are living longer, they're living longer with things such as Alzheimer's disease, other types of sensory disabilities and impairments, other types of physical disabilities. And this is really kind of what's causing the larger problem, in my opinion, and the opinion of other researchers as well. Now, one of the more shocking things in terms of statistics is we always hear about kind of countries that are becoming super aged. So that is, at some point in the near future, to be considered super age, 1 out of 3 people in the population will be over the age of 65. And when we talk about super age countries, we always tend to think about Japan, China, other parts of Asia, etc. And in fact, many of us don't realize that Canada is going to be one of those super age countries as well. While obviously the size and the scale of number of older people is not comparable to China and other places in Asia, the fact that Canada is a super age country by the year 2050, and in fact some people are predicting it'll be earlier than that, is also a big issue we need to start considering moving forward. However, in my mind, one of the bigger complications is not the fact that we have a growing number of older people, is the fact that we have fewer people to look after them, right? And again, there's people in the audience that do research around this that know this far better than I do. But if you kind of look at this trend that comes out of the United States, but similar here in Canada around the world, basically what this is showing is that over time and over the years, there's actually going to be fewer people looking after or able to look after older people in Canada as well. Now, this causes a lot of issues, obviously, because as we hear from many cases, caregivers themselves, and when I talk about caregivers, I'm talking about family members, spouses, sons, daughters, etc., is they're also suffering from their own physical and cognitive and mental health issues as well. And in fact, as it says here, 70–80% of family caregivers all reporting some kind of mental health issue, mainly related to their caregiving activities. Now, Canada also, though, poses a unique situation from a geographic perspective, right? We're a very diverse and very spread out country when it comes to our urban centers. So it's not unheard of that you hear about children living in Vancouver, looking after their elderly parents in Halifax, and somehow trying to coordinate this. They're still coordinating their medication, they're coordinating their doctor's appointments, etc., from a very large distance. Add to that the fact that, again, we have a very large rural population and Indigenous communities. This really makes the caregiving situation in Canada quite unique around the world. And in fact, many countries are coming to Canada to try to take advantage of the unique circumstances we have here to study these issues and to help develop better solutions. However, in light of all this doom and gloom that we hear, the good news is we can all continue to age well, right? And what do we mean by aging well or healthy aging? But essentially, as we grow old, we have the ability to remain independent in our lives and to actively participate in society the way that we want to, right? So it's a very holistic approach to aging. And in my research, and many of the research programs of you in the audience that I know of, and also in the Age Well Network, we believe we can all age well even in the face of disease and permanent disability. We believe and firmly believe that even a person with Alzheimer's disease can still age well with the right interventions and the right supports in place. Now, those interventions may be a strong caregiver team, good connections with their family physician, access to services, but in our case, obviously, we're talking about technology as one of those solutions. So here I have 3 examples of technologies. On purpose, they're all ones that are commonly known and off the shelf, because again, this is what we're starting to see. It's not just kind of these unique, specially built pieces of technology supporting older people and caregivers, but ones that are readily available in your current, Best Buy or Home Depot or wherever else you want to buy your electronics. So obviously tablets. Tablets are playing a huge role in the area of support for older adults, whether it's social connectedness, accessing information for education, or even cognitive support. That picture actually is taken from an Age Well project, so that is using the Nintendo Wii gaming system to set up a virtual bowling league across the country. And again, a relatively simple solution, one that currently exists, is shown to have fairly significant impact on the quality of lives of the residents of these nursing facilities with respect to their socialization, their health outcomes, their wellness, etc. And then in this day and age, you can't talk about technology without talking about wearables. We have all of us in this room have some kind of wearable technology on us, I bet, whether it's a smartphone, a smartwatch, a Fitbit, whatever it may be, collecting information about our health, our wellness, our activities, which can be used, as I'll show you later on, hopefully to support the health and wellness of older people and all of us as we age. Now, there's again a good news, bad news story here. So the good news is the literature and the research has shown that technology can have very significant potential and opportunities to support healthy and active aging, right? Again, there's a lot of literature over the past couple of decades that have shown various types of technologies, whether off the shelf or being custom built, that's really supporting individuals as they age in various aspects of their lives, whether it's supporting activities of daily living to health monitoring or monitoring perhaps a chronic disease. However, our blue stripes are back. Is everyone okay with those blue stripes, or are they distracting? I'm not quite sure why they're there, but anyways. Oh, they're gone. Now, the bad news to this story, though, beyond the blue stripes, is that while the literature has shown that technology can have a positive impact on older people, there's also a dearth of literature out there that shows that once the research is done, once you go back to the older person and say, okay, well, where's the technology now? The abandonment rates are still very, very high. And what we actually see in the tech and aging space, it's very similar numbers to what we see in assistive technology in general. And that is 70 to 80% of all tech are actually abandoned within the first 3 months of use by the individuals, right? And so the question is, well, what is going on here, right? Why is there not traction in the work that we're doing? Why are we spending so much time, so much effort, and so much of taxpayer dollars through research grants, et cetera, if the solutions we're coming up with are not getting out there, not being gaining traction among the people that we're designing them for, and that is older people and caregivers. So that really comes to my point here is at the end of the day, we've done some great work, but we need to do better. As a technology and aging field, and I can say this as being in the field for almost 25 years, is we have failed miserably in delivering on all the promises that we've been making in this area, right? We have been developing all this tech. Many years ago, I remember people standing and saying robots will be in people's homes by 2018, and they're not. I remember people saying, and myself included, that smart homes are going to be able to care for older people and make them independent. Well, these solutions do not exist. And what's ended up happening is we've basically had this failure to launch in our field. Again, great research happening, but we're not getting the solutions transferred from the research labs out into the marketplace. And as a result, what ends up happening is because there's so few solutions, the ones that do exist are quite expensive. You know, it's still amazing when you go online to see how much a piece of technology that supports the health of older people or people with disabilities costs. And it's 5, 10 times more than a typical consumer product. But perhaps more importantly is when you talk to older people and caregivers themselves and you ask them, well, why are you abandoning this solution? It often comes down to things around usability. I just find the device too difficult to use. I can't figure out how to, collect the data. I can't see the labels on the screen. At the end of the day, this just doesn't fit into my lifestyle. And we hear that a lot from older people still when we look at the solutions that we're developing that others are developing as well. So the question is, well, how do we get around this? How do we get over this failure to launch? Well, the first thing we obviously need to do is identify why is it like this, right? And here I have 3 very high-level points, which again are based very much on my own experience and the things we're seeing in the age-well network. But many of them are also coming anecdotally from older people themselves. So first and foremost, the needs of older adults are very complex, and even more so in the face of specific impairments like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, etc. The older adult population is not homogeneous. It's actually one of the most heterogeneous populations and demographics you're going to see out there. And I get this all the time from older people when I present to them. They say, Alex, the message you really need to get across is when you've seen one senior, you've seen one senior, right? And so a one-fit-all solution from a tech perspective is most likely not going to work for this demographic. And that is a very complex issue as an engineer and a designer of technology to get over, because how are you going to overcome that? We're not going to develop 1,000 different solutions for our 1,000 different customers. And later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and some of these new sophisticated approaches, and this is where perhaps we can help overcome some of these issues. Now, related to this first one is obviously that more often than not, and understanding the user's needs is not part of the project. And I still see this all the time. Students, startups, other companies coming to meet with us in AgeWell, and really, it's very clear that their knowledge of the older adult population is based on their grandparent or their elderly parent, right? So they're basically taking a case study of one, and from that, they're extracting that knowledge, and they're trying to develop a solution based on it. And this is something that we're really trying hard to overcome within the AgeWell network, is really trying to ensure that all of our researchers, all of our partners, whether they're from industry, government, or elsewhere, are really working right with the older adults themselves and the caregivers to gain this understanding. And not 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road in the project, but right from day one, right? And researchers in the room here that are part of AgeWell know we try to hammer this home. They're probably sick of us of saying it, but I think it's something that everyone's bought into and is resulting in better solutions out of our network and our researchers. And finally, there still is this silo mentality within the field that has resulted in poor outcomes. And what I mean by this is while we still talk a big game around multidisciplinary research or transdisciplinary research or whatever we want to call it, we still very much have the engineers working separately from the gerontologists, working separately from the family physicians, working separately from the caregivers. And again, more likely than not, the older adults are not part of that team right from the beginning. So while we try to preach this essentially in AgeWell and try to incentivize it, we still have a long way to go in this particular area. And again, this is where I feel not only do we have to get the researchers pushing this, but we really need to get a very strong voice from the older adult population demographic as well, saying that we want to be part of this, right? We want to be part of this from day one. And that's why it's so great to see so many of the consumers here in the audience that I understand is part of the center here and Paul's work. So I really commend you guys for really taking this hard and moving it forward here in Waterloo. So moving on, say we get this all figured out, right? We figure out that older adults are not homogeneous, we understand their needs, we break down the silos. Well, the problem now is it's a moving target. Because the older people we're designing for today are not going to most likely be the older people using the technologies that come out of our research down the road or come out of our startups, et cetera. It is going to be a very different older adult demographic in 5 years from now. And so a debate that we always have in our field, and we have this within AgeWell right now, is who are we actually designing for? Why are we putting so much effort into current older adult needs right now from a tech perspective as opposed to focusing 5 or 10 years down the road? How much of a balance should we have in terms of what we fund and what we invest in? And again, we need to really figure this out because it's going to be a really important notion. And later on, the third part of my talk, I'm going to come back to this point and present some of my thoughts on that. The same things also happen from the caregiver perspective. Right? Caregivers in Canada today are younger than they used to be, and they're far more tech savvy, and they have a far greater expectation that technology will be part of any of their solutions. Right? We have caregivers in age well all the time. One of them's in this room right now, who comes to me and tells me about the technology solution that he's developed for his parents. And I'll be honest, and sometimes I will not, well, he's in the room, so I'm going to admit it to him, many of his solutions are better than the ones we've been developing for years in our research labs. Okay? I'm not looking him in the eye because I know he's smiling at this right now. So, the question is, what do we do about this? How do we get ourselves back on track as a field to move forward? And this is where the notion of disruption comes into play. And I know the word disruption is overplayed in the media and the news. You hear it all the time. But I still feel it's one that's important for us to take in consideration in the technology and aging field. So again, for the sake of completeness, what do I mean by disruptive technology? But basically anything that comes on the marketplace that blows things up and causes us all to think differently. Right? You think about the digital camera. Digital cameras came to the marketplace, everyone else followed suit or be left behind. We saw that with Kodak. Kodak went bankrupt, okay, because they refused to become a digital camera company. They were a film-based company. Same thing with the iPhone, right? As soon as Steve Jobs convinced all of us that why would you ever make a phone call on your phone? You want to do all these other things. Everyone else had to follow suit or be left behind. So what I'm saying here is we need to do the exact same thing in tech and aging. We need to come up with new ways of thinking and new ways of doing. We basically can no longer be incremental. We cannot just build upon the small successes we've had so far in this field. We need to blow things up and just rethink this field and our strategies moving forward. What do I mean by this? We need to get away from this. Okay? Everyone recognizes the product on the one side, your personal emergency response system push button. Help, I've fallen, I can't get up. If you do an economic analysis, and I've kind of done this on the back of a napkin, and you look at technology for older adults on the consumer marketplace for the past 30 years, from a market size, from a revenue perspective, et cetera, this is considered one of the most successful technologies for older adults. But it's one of the worst, right? The companies themselves are first to say 70% of our clients never wear the button. And when you talk to them and say, well, why aren't you wearing the button? A lot of it comes down to usability and stigma. I don't want my friends or my family to know there's something wrong with me. Right? I forget to put it on after I get out of the shower. It's just ugly. I don't like the way it looks. Now, 80% of the people who do wear it never push it in the case of emergency. Right? Again, why don't you push the button? Their words, not mine. I know if I push this button, it's a one-way ticket out of my home into long-term care. I know if I push this, I'm never coming back to my community or my home. But again, this is considered the state of the art in technology and aging. So we need to move away from this and understand what else can we be doing from a technology perspective to overcome the stigma and the usability issues that this type of product has. And again, start to move something that's better for the clients we're designing for. Now, part of this is, as a field, we need to do some self-reflection. I'm going to come back to this later on. I'm an engineer by being a professor in occupational therapy for 15 years, so I've been taught how to be self-reflective. That's the one thing they always try to teach me. Alex, you got to be more self-reflective. So as a field, we need to understand, where do we now fit into the technology and aging landscape? Okay? And you can think a little bit about this throughout my talks. I'm going to come back to this with my answer, which may be very different from your answers moving forward. So let's move into the next part of my talk. Where can we be disruptive? Where, in my opinion, and again, I need to stress this is in my opinion, are some areas of technology that we're currently developing in AgeWell and across Canada, and again here at the University of Waterloo, that can truly be disruptive and move us away from your typical push-button system that we're currently selling. And in my mind, there's three areas: smart homes, robots, and big data. Now keep in mind, I'm not talking about a short-term horizon here. I'm talking about 5-10 years down the road. So what I want to do is talk about each of these areas a little bit and actually show you some examples of technology that are being developed across Canada here and where Canada really is becoming the world leader in these areas. So smart homes. So I would say smart homes has been the longest standing area of research in tech and aging. There's been smart home research for older people probably been done for the past 30 years. And again, it's still going very, very strong. And what we've seen is a variety of technologies being developed. For example, technologies that support older adults with dementia through daily activities. Okay, so these are technologies that would recognize that the person is becoming confused, maybe trying to make a cup of tea or to brush their teeth or to get dressed, and would give them the prompts and reminders of what they need to do, just like a family caregiver would. We're also seeing a lot of work in terms of modern activity levels and patterns of living. Right? So collecting large data sets, which I'll come back to later on, that allows us to understand what the person is doing in the home and to understand are there changes in their health or perhaps even predict what's going to happen in their health as well. The final area we're seeing a lot of work done is also measuring typical health parameters, but in a different way. Okay? So measuring things like blood pressure, heart rate, etc., but not requiring that effort from the person. And this is really taken to the idea of the notion that myself and one of my colleagues and former trainees, Jen Boger, somewhere in the room, coined the term zero-effort technologies. Read her latest monograph on this that just came up. It's really great. But basically not requiring the person to have to remember how to put the blood pressure cuff on, how to push the button, et cetera. And what you see in this video here is an example of such a technology. So this is one of my grad students sitting in our home lab watching TV, because that's what they do apparently when I'm away. And here you see we're getting a live ECG from this person. Okay? And amazingly enough, there's nothing worn on him. Okay? There's no sensors, no devices. It's basically these two pieces of copper tape with a lot of guts and stuff behind it, a lot of algorithms developed, but essentially allowing us to get this information as he or she goes about their natural daily activities. Now the power of this combined with these other types of things in smart homes is not only can we get the health data, but we can also get the context behind those measurements. Right? So we can now know based on sensors like that, plus some motion sensors for the monitor activity levels, and we can understand that the person's heart rate is now elevated because they've climbed a set of stairs, versus their heart rate becoming elevated by just sitting there watching television, which obviously may indicate some kind of change in health that should be checked out. Now, an extension of smart homes are robots. Okay? And personally, and a lot of people disagree with me, personally I feel that personal robots will actually be a reality in people's homes within the next 5 years. In fact, there are robots out there that you can purchase for not enormous cost, for under $1,000, that do a lot of things that we're talking about here. Here's two examples of robotics projects that are on the AgeWell network right now. One's a social robot, one's a cognitive robot. I'll show you a video of the social robot in a second. So basically this robot here is named Ed. Ed supports older adults during activities of daily living, as I described before, and gives prompts and reminders, as you'll see. Brian is an older robot developed by a professor, Goldie Nejad, out of U of T. And what Brian does and his future versions is that it does cognitive stimulation with older people. So in this example here, it's playing a card matching game with the older person. So basically where you have to flip over matching pairs, and once you get them, you take them off the board. And so the robot's playing this. Professor Nejad has done other things, such as has this robot actually call bingo numbers in a nursing home, sit down and socialize and have a conversation over a meal, and kind of just have a typical two-way interaction. Now, before I show the video, I just want to address one thing, because the question I always get, people always say, well, that's great, but shouldn't you want real people playing games with the older people in the nursing homes instead of a robot? And the answer, as we all know, is absolutely yes. Right? We do not want robots doing these things. But anyone who spent time in a nursing home or a care facility, we all know that the staff is at their wits' end. Right? They're burdened already just trying to get that person up out of bed, dressed, bathed, toileted, fed, medicated, and kept safe. You don't think they'd love to sit down and play a card game with the residents and have some social time? Absolutely, but they can't. And this is what robots do. Robots and other types of technologies is one tool that caregivers, whether a family or a paid caregiver, can use to fill those gaps. Personally, and this is a whole other lecture, I feel in aging we have the robotic paradigm totally reversed. We should be developing the robots that get the people out of bed, bathed, toilet, etc., and let the caregivers do the fun things, right? Thank you. I got like one of these over there. That's the first time someone clapped at that statement, so that's great. So, anyways, having said that, having digressed, let's show you Ed the robot quickly here. Hopefully the volume's okay. Oh, there's no sound. That's okay. So basically what happened there is Ed the robot off on the side there detected a problem with one of the steps and gave him a verbal prompt. What's happening here is, again, it's detecting this person has had a problem with a particular step of tea making, but has also learned over time using artificial intelligence that this person needs to have a more detailed prompt. So in fact, the person needs to be addressed by name, and also need to be shown a video demonstrating the particular step. Okay? So this is the interesting thing where artificial intelligence comes into play, that allows us to learn about individual habits, individual preferences, and then to adapt the way the technology operates accordingly. And that's why it goes back to the statement I made before around we can't build 1,000 different personalized devices. But sophisticated approaches like artificial intelligence, machine learning, advances in sensors and other types of algorithms can help us do this customization. And a good example of this, what is already happening, is on your smartphone, right? Before, with the old flip phones, you were not able to modify or adapt those devices whatsoever based on a person's preferences, skill levels, disability, etc. But now that smartphones are so software-based, you can customize all these things. And I guarantee that if I picked up the smartphones of everyone in this front row, your settings and features and look of your phone is going to be completely different from each one, because you set this up based on your own preferences. Okay? Final area is big data. And again, we hear a lot about big data. There's a lot of big data everywhere. We're worried about security, privacy, etc. But again, in my opinion, big data can have a significant impact on the lives of older people. And the reason for that is because what we're starting to see in the homes of not just older people, but everyone, are things that look like this picture, right? All of our homes are becoming a network of various sensors, whether we realize they're there or not, that are collecting literally hundreds of thousands of data points about us on a daily basis. Okay? Whether that's coming from motion sensors, which may be part of our home security system, to a cell phone or a smartphone, specialized devices such as bed sensors, or even eventually a robot in our home, all this information is being collected. So the question is, well, what is this good for? What can we do with this data that can help older people and caregivers? Here's a nice example. This is data that's collected from some of our collaborators in the US from Oregon Health Sciences University, Dr. Jeff Kay. And what this shows is a radial plot. So you have 0-100 hours to 2,400 hours on this circle plot, so basically the time of day. And then the different colors are just motion sensors in each of the different rooms of a person's home. So each dot is the motion sensor firing, indicating there's some kind of motion in that room. And what you very quickly see from this relatively simple data is a pattern of living, right? You can see that the person goes to bed around 11:30 p.m. They sleep to about 6:30, 7. Then they get up around 7 a.m. They do their morning routine. They do their breakfast. Maybe around 8 o'clock they go out for a walk or something. Then they come back and there's various pieces of data, et cetera, that's coming out of it. So this is great. So right now, you can see that this data can be quite useful for kind of the here and now. So we can very quickly see in present day a change in this data set. So all of a sudden tomorrow, I'm collecting this data from my parents or my mom, and I can see that she's gone to the bathroom twice as many times, which is not typical for her. Well, maybe this is indicating something like a urinary tract infection, et cetera. And again, there's research that have shown the correlation of this kind of data with those kinds of diseases and impairments. Or perhaps we see that all of a sudden my parents have not gone into the kitchen all day. They've not opened the refrigerator all day. Well, what's going on there? So again, it gives me kind of a present day alert to call them up and see what's going on with them. However, in my mind, that is not where big data is going to have the most significant impact on older people. Big data is great for collecting this kind of information, but where it's going to have the most significant impact on older adults and keeping them safe is in predicting changes in their health and wellness before these changes actually even occur. Okay? We want to predict things such as change in state of chronic conditions like congestive heart failure, diabetes, so we can put intervention in place. We want to predict adverse events. A lot of us in Canada around the world are developing fall detection systems to replace the current push button. But at the end of the day, the holy grail is fall prediction, not fall detection. We want to prevent the fall from happening, right, in order to avoid the injury. So using that kind of data, and there's research that's happening in the age-old network right now that's trying to do that. For example, looking at the gait patterns or the walking patterns of older people over and over again, and using that to predict who's going to be at risk of falling over the next 7, 14, 21 days. Okay? And finally, obviously, doing things like predicting things like dangerous behaviors, agitation, aggression, or changes in cognition or onset of dementia. So in fact, this data set right here, and the most important number is this 0.85, shows that using that data set I showed before, the radial plot, that by putting that into an artificial intelligence model, specifically around machine learning, that after 3 months of that data with 85% accuracy, we are able to predict who is going to develop dementia over the next 12 months. Now, the other key thing to mention here is none of this is meant to be a diagnostic tool. We're not diagnosing Alzheimer's. We're not diagnosing dementia or diagnosing diabetes. Again, these are tools that the older person and their caregivers can be using to raise alerts, right, in order to understand whether an intervention needs to be put in place, what that intervention may be, whether it's technological or not, and essentially in order to get ahead of that curve. And that's what we hear from a lot of family caregivers. So for example, when we present this dementia project to them, we often get comments like, well, this would have been fantastic because if we had an extra 6 months to help us prepare for my dad who's developing Alzheimer's disease, to better understand and educate ourselves, we could have probably been a lot better right now and be a lot less stressed in terms of the care that we're providing. Now, having said that and given those examples, the final part of my talk is how to move forward. And I say design for our future selves because, again, this goes back to the notion I said before that who are we designing for? Is it current older adults? Or is it future older adults? Is it ourselves who are developing the technologies? And how are we actually going to move this field forward? So again, we can continue to develop some great technologies. We can continue to develop some really wonderful robots and smart homes, etc. But if the current landscape doesn't change in order to help move this innovation forward, in order to support us as researchers, academics, startup companies, etc., to move the innovation to the marketplace, again, we're going to be no further ahead. So the question is, what has to happen? Okay? And then what I'm going to present now is just some ideas, again, from my own thoughts and my own experiences on things I think we need to consider as a field in order to continue to move our field forward. So this is going to be very familiar to those who are involved in AgeWell 2.0 moving forward, that the technology is not enough. We believe that you can build the best and coolest robot possible, but if you do not understand how you're going to deliver that robot or that service into the older person's home, and if you don't understand how the regulatory landscape in Canada or elsewhere needs to change to allow that robot to be used, then the robot's going to sit in the research lab. Okay? And Ed and Brian that I showed you before, sitting in the research lab because we did not consider these things when we developed them. So in AgeWell and in our field, we feel that all three of these parts need to be equally understood and looked at as part of the research project. Okay? So equally, you need to understand the technology, you need to understand the service delivery, and the practice and policy. In particular, the new delivery models is an interesting area because this is, in my opinion, what's being changing the quickest in the technology and aging field, how these technologies are getting out the door. The majority of new technologies being developed, I would say in AgeWell, about 90% of them, are not medical devices. They should not be regulated like a medical device. They should not be delivered like a medical device. In fact, the majority of the technologies being developed today for older people and caregivers are consumer products. They are consumer products that should be delivered in a consumer product kind of channel or delivery method. In fact, we're starting to see that. In the US and soon in Canada, Best Buy, for example, has launched their own smart home service for older people called Assured Living, right? They're directly targeting towards older people and their caregivers. In fact, what they've also done is they've taken their Geek Squad that comes and sets up your computers and your stair equipment to actually go into the homes of older people and assess their needs and how a smart home system can address those needs. And then the Geek Squad themselves customize it, install it, and then maintain it for you. Right? Now, when I ask them what training does your Geek Squad have with older people, they're like, none. So that's something we're trying to help them now as an AgeWell partner. But this is the route they're going with. Best Buy has gone one step further. They've now partnered in the US with the Mayo Clinic in order to also then provide that wellness support. So basically with the technology, there's a 1-800 number that the older people can also access that connects them right to people at the Mayo Clinic that can provide them advice on their health, wellness, various conditions, etc. And again, this is coming to Canada. It's already been launched in Vancouver as a pilot study. So let's look at one case example of where I see service delivery actually holding the technology back for older people. Autonomous vehicles. Obviously, we hear a lot about driverless cars, autonomous vehicles. Waterloo has a big program here, as does Toronto and elsewhere. And we continue to see statements like here at the bottom. This one's a bit older, but we still see statements. The self-driving car godsend for older Americans now on the horizon. And when you ask the AARP and others, well, what do you mean by that? And when you talk to companies like Uber and say, well, how are they going to use driverless vehicles for older people? They say, well, it'll be fantastic. An older person loses their license because of dementia or poor vision, whatever else, no problem. We have a car that comes up to their home, it'll pick them up, take them to the grocery store, take them to their friends, bring them home. Everyone maintains their mobility, everyone stays on the road. Well, you ask them about the service delivery problem, and you ask, well, why do you think many older people still call for a taxi? Why do you think they call for their caregiver to come drive them somewhere? And a lot of times it has to do with the physical capabilities of getting in and out of the vehicle, getting their groceries into the trunk, folding up their walker, whatever it may be. So what's going to happen now when a car pulls up and there's no one in there? Who's going to help with those physical tasks that are often still the barriers? So while we can get them from the curbside to the grocery store, we can't get them from the front door to the curb. Okay? And this is actually a growing concern that we've seen among older people that we worked with around transportation. And so again, this is a service delivery problem because the technology for the most part is there. These cars are driving around relatively safely. Yes, we hear about the 1 or 2 deaths that happen, but we never hear about the millions of non-deaths, right, that are happening with these driverless cars. So the tech is there for the most part. It's the service delivery part and the practice and policy that they've not thought through when it comes to older people. The next notion comes down to this whole notion again about who are we designing for. And this is now where I'm going to totally contradict what I've said before and contradict the whole theory in age well. And I'm going to say, have we actually pushed this pendulum too far between market pull and market push? And what I mean by this is initially we started out by designing technologies and pushing the technology out there because it was really cool. We didn't listen to the older person. In my opinion, we've actually gone too far. As developers of technology right now, we are very afraid to develop anything without the blessing of our consumer. And because of that, I feel it's actually holding innovation back. And so the key thing is, where is the middle ground in this whole area? And this is actually captured quite nicely by James Dyson. And this is from a very reputable source. It's the Air Canada In-Flight magazine. So you know it's very scientific. But James Dyson, who again developed the Dyson vacuum cleaner and other things, says, what I've learned on the fly, that market research isn't needed when launching a new product. It either tells you what you already know or puts you off from going for it. And this leads into the whole notion of the innovator's dilemma. So the innovator's dilemma was developed, the theory was developed by a person named Christensen out of Harvard University. He used to be with Harvard. He's also the person who basically coined the term disruption or disruptive technologies. But essentially what Christensen did is he studied over the past 2 decades all the high-tech companies that went bankrupt and tried to understand what was the common thread that resulted in all of them going bankrupt. And what he found is because all these companies were too focused on their current day customers and not trying to predict where their future customers are going to want to be or what they're going to want to use. The message I'm going to get across here is that I feel as a tech and aging field, we're falling into the innovator's dilemma. Again, going back to that question I raised before, who are we designing for? Is it current day or future older people? Now, I'm not saying we ignore the current demographic, but we need to find the right balance in our field if we're going to be successful. Because if we don't, and we continue to shift this pendulum too far over, in 5 years from now, I'm going to be standing up here saying the exact same thing. So the final piece of this is, how do we stay relevant? How do we stay relevant as a field in technology and aging when we see constant headlines like Amazon hiring the foremost geriatrician in the United States to lead their division on technology for older people? How do we stay relevant with things such as Silicon Valley goes gray? You know, you can't go to Silicon Valley these days without throwing a stone and hitting a startup that's focused on technology for older people. How do we stay relevant and compete against Google and Amazon that's turned their hands-free devices such as Google Home or Amazon Alexa into devices that can support older people? Amazon is developing a fall detection system on Amazon Alexa. And how do we stay relevant and compete with Apple, whose watches now can detect falls and other things like AFib, et cetera? You know, as researchers, and again, myself, and Jen can attest to this because she was part of it, you know, we were developing a fall detection system for 10 years. But again, within a few months, a company like Apple comes out with a device that's now a consumer-based product that's doing exactly what we were trying to do. Now, whether their results are good or bad, we don't know that. And I'll get to that in a second. But the question is, what is our place in this field? Going back to that original question I asked. My answer to that question is the following, and source, my opinion, 2019. Within 5 years, as a field, we'll be no longer developing technologies. We have no business in 5 years to be developing technologies as academics and researchers in the area of technology and aging. We cannot compete with these companies. We cannot compete with the basic sheer size and volume of their budgets and resources. We cannot compete with their accelerated timelines to get things out. We cannot compete when we need to go through things like ethics, recruitment, this, that, get the CIHR grant, to get this all going. We're going to be left behind if we continue to keep this as our focus, as many of us are doing right now. So the question then is, where can we continue to have impact as a field? What can we do as researchers and interested parties in technology and aging to continue to remain relevant? So my idea is, let's not compete with those companies. Let's do things that support industry that's driving this field forward for us. Because we continue to be the experts and understand the needs of older people and caregivers. Companies like Google and Amazon are still coming to networks like AgeWell saying, we need help on the insights on this marketplace so we can develop the solutions for them. We are the experts in being able to bring together a diverse group of researchers and stakeholders working on common goals. We are the experts still in ensuring that new solutions are tested and implemented through rigorous methodologies and approaches. And again, we're seeing that more and more in AgeWell. Companies coming to us saying, can you help us do the testing? Can you help us understand if we're doing the right things? And obviously, we're also the expert in understanding how these new solutions can fit into existing service delivery models, including developing brand new service delivery models as well. But perhaps most importantly, we can actually be that window into the future. Right? Our insights, our creativity as a field, our understanding of things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, all based on years and years of research that's been happening in academia, can be used to ensure that our partners understand what can happen and what the possibilities are 5, 10 years down the road. And essentially, as a field, supporting our partners not to become victims of that innovator's dilemma that I described before. So, my last slide. Where do we go from here? Well, hopefully I've convinced you there is some future here, right? That while I did give some examples of doom and gloom, there is some positive impact and very positive impact that our field can have on the lives of older people and caregivers. And the key thing is the time is now. Again, I've been in this field for almost 25 years, and the past couple years only, I've seen this unique moment in time where people are recognizing the demographic shift. People are understanding that something has to be done that's different. Governments are investing in this area and in the technology and aging space. So combine all these strategies and the understanding that people actually want to use technology and that they're able to use technology is really giving us this moment not to be incremental anymore, but actually to make some kind of significant change. But doing so and no longer being incremental does require us to reconsider some things, reconsider traditional models and approaches in the design and the delivery of these future systems. And finally, as part of this, again, we need to be self-reflective. As a field, we must be open and prepared to rethink our own roles in the field, even if that means as an engineer, I'm no longer developing the gizmo or the device that's going out there. That I'm doing things maybe a bit more downstream and relying more and working more with my partners to help move these innovations forward. Having said that, I thank you very much for having me. It was a joy and a pleasure to talk with all you, and I look forward to questions and further discussion outside. So again, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Alex, for that very timely and thought-provoking talk. We have time for a few questions. So we have people willing to run around with microphones.
Yeah, so the question is, so how do we actually get our research in front of these big companies like Google and Amazon and ensure that they know what we're doing? And the big lesson I've learned in the past few years with AgeWell is we really need to work on our business case as researchers and our value add. And one of the big shifts I had in my mentality from running AgeWell is before it, I would always go into these companies and basically say, well, what are you guys going to do for me as a researcher? And it's different now. You have to go right in there and show what can we do for you as a researcher and you guys as the industry partner, right? So we really need to continue to build that value add and get that messaging out there. And I think that's one key thing we really tried to do in our network is to build that as a field and get that message out there, which I think is paying off now. Because again, we're now getting the Googles, the Amazons, the Best Buys coming to us and saying, hey, we see the value add from the researchers and the work that you guys are doing. How can we become part of the network in order to learn from those experiences, right? So again, it's that shift. I don't know how to put this politely, but as academics, we always tended to have the view of, we're the best out there, what can you guys do to help us? And it's no longer the case in our field, right?
Really thought-provoking. Thanks for your insights. I mean, the one thing I guess that I'm thinking about, if you're suggesting a shift towards, greater industry partnerships, is always equity and the availability of these things, affordability, and so forth. So, do you have any thoughts on how, frameworks that you would use or approaches to ensure equity?
So you mean equity and availability of the solutions to the marketplace or to certain demographics? Yeah, so I think actually having these stronger partnerships and moving more of this consumer approach will actually increase equity and the availability of these solutions. Because right now, the tech that's coming out, again, is so expensive that no one can really afford it. And there's really no mechanisms out there that are subsidizing a lot of these solutions. You look in Ontario at ADP or equivalent programs, a lot of them, these programs are not going to support a lot of the tech that we're developing. So really, if we push these out in the consumer marketplace, in theory, it should drive the cost down. There should be more competition out there. And hopefully that's going to improve the equity and availability of these solutions at the end of the day, right? Up to this point, we really haven't thought in that way. We've always still tended to think about these things being traditional medical devices and being recommended by the occupational therapist or the family physician, et cetera. And again, you talk to these individuals, there's not even equity there. Some OTs, some family physicians are really gung-ho about tech as a solution. Some are absolutely not whatsoever, and so they're not giving it to their patients or recommending it to their patients. Right?
Hello? Oh, it works. My question relates to the amount of data that's being generated with all of these technologies in the home. And from a clinician's perspective, we're going to have to address the change in the healthcare system to address these huge amounts of data, to be able to interpret it and act on it. Yeah. How do you see this moving forward?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Again, I think it comes down to the making the data available to the person themselves for them to make use of it in their own decisions. I don't see or foresee it being a sustainable or a good model that all the data we're collecting is being delivered right into the healthcare system or into our electronic health records, at least not at this point. I would still say a lot of the data being collected right now are being used or should be used by the caregivers, by the families, by the person themselves to start making their own decisions on the intervention that should be in place, or to have their own decision to go to their family physician and say, hey, this is what we've observed over the past little while. Here's some data to show it. What can we do? I don't personally think our healthcare system is ready also for this type of information. When I present, for example, the project on predicting dementia and other diseases to family physicians, and this actually happened last year, I had family physicians angry with me, right? Just angry. They're like, no, I do not want my patients coming and saying their smart home thinks they have Alzheimer's. People are saying, I don't want them coming to me and saying that they think they have a disease that I cannot provide a cure for or support for, right? So why would I support this type of technology? But again, it's a very different story from the caregivers. So I think you need to start at that level, really start at a grassroots, and then build it up from there somehow. Again, there's experts in this, I'm looking at John, and there's experts in this audience who probably have much better answers than I do, so feel free to pipe in whenever you guys want to. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Thank you for your talk, it was brilliant. You'd mentioned a lot about how kind of researchers in the academy might be taking a more downstream approach to kind of implementing and really evaluating what industry makes. What do you think is going to be the change in what the researcher's role will be then in terms of kind of shifting more to implementation science more exclusively, or will it look more like being involved in some way in parallel with industry and then kind of leading the charge for the actual evaluation of it, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think, again, it comes back to showing the value add of offering those types of quote-unquote services to industry, showing that, we are the experts who can help evaluate these things. We are the experts that can put rigorous methodologies behind things. And again, I think we're starting to see that shift, right? We're getting a lot of companies that are coming to AgeWell and saying, look, we can't afford to put together our own evaluation team. We can't afford to put together our own R&D team. So let's outsource that to the universities and academics who can do that, well. But just to add to that, I also believe that, as I kind of alluded to, the other role for academia is and on the very other side, right? The more not the basic science behind things, but kind of the earlier research, right? Looking at where, again, things like machine learning or robotics can go that'll be ready 10 years down the road. So I think, we're basically bookending, I think, industry in the model that I'm thinking about here moving forward. Right?
Perfect, thank you.
Dr. Mihailidis has a question.
Alex, thanks for your talk. Your point about the analytic challenges is absolutely correct, that there will be some difficulties in figuring out how does that get to the health system. There's a different kind of problem that I would anticipate that's a non-technological problem, that's privacy issues. So I see three kinds of privacy problems. One, older adults may not want their kids to know what they're doing at home. Second is that there's a lot of difficulty in sharing data within the circle of care, even current healthcare data, we haven't figured that out. And then the third is the general suspicion of large companies gathering data. So what have you guys done on the privacy side of things?
Yeah, so the privacy side of things is always going to be an ongoing issue. I'm probably going to give an answer that everyone disagrees with, that I think we actually are over concerned with privacy and security, and that's actually, again, stopping innovation. Before we do anything, it's like, what about privacy? Oh, we can't do that because of privacy concerns. I think the privacy and security are going to continue to sort themselves out because there's some really interesting work and good work happening in other fields and sectors that we can be taken from and pulling into our area. Again, it's just a matter of those things of understanding what the privacy and security concerns will be and ensuring that we're mindful of them as moving forward. But I don't want to see it always kind of stopping innovation dead because we just think that's going to be the end of the day. And actually, we ran a focus group several years ago with older people when it came to things like fall detection, emergency response, et cetera. And the question we kind of asked them is, well, what would you prefer? A device that completely maintains your privacy and security, doesn't use cameras, et cetera, but will only detect falls 30% of the time, or a system that actually knows who you are, looks at your face, collects that information, but detects falls 95% of the time? Well, what do you think the answer was, right? It was on the latter. They said, well, yeah, I want to be safe. So again, I think it's the way we frame it, the way we pose the questions, but again, ensuring that it's understandable that we're mindful about these things and transparent about it as we move forward.
Thank you. Nick, another question? Dr. Jane Gregorio.
Thanks for your talk. It was, I like the big ideas that you were putting forward. I was thinking about funding models and a lot of the work, the pre-work that you have to do some of we don't have a good funding model for that. So the consultations and the proof of concept work, and it's actually a suggestion I made to one of the IMHA chair when he was here. We need actually a funding stream for proof of concept work and this type of work, because no one will fund it, and they won't fund the big idea until you have pilot data and all this stuff, but no one will fund that work.
Yeah, well, someone will fund that work right now. It's AgeWell. But unfortunately, the federal government has ended the NC program. So that's my plug right there. Everyone can tweet that right now if you wish. It's at Minister Duncan, Minister of Science. So you're absolutely right. And this is, not to focus on AgeWell and the change in funding programs, but this is really one of our biggest concerns in the AgeWell network right now, is that that type of work you're specifically talking about is now just going to fall in the gaps once again. And at the end of the day, we're going from an AgeWell environment of 40% success rate of funding, putting our field back into the pool of 4 to 8% success rate. So what's going to happen? Because these are going to be really important questions that need to answer. Now, one of the solutions we're looking at, and I've seen many of our researchers do successfully, is turning to the private foundations in industry to fund that exact type of work, right? Doing programs like with OBI or OCE or MITAX, where you bring these partners in, where essentially they're going to help co-fund that kind of work. The biggest sector I'm seeing that's really supportive of that are the startup companies. The startup companies, use that information. It's really, really critical for them to get the edge on other companies. And many of them are very willing to be part of these partnerships in order to work with academia to get that kind of knowledge into their system. So I think there is a way forward, but it's going to really rely on us being in the bushes more. And again, going back to showing what our value add is to industry and these foundations and other partners outside of our typical funding agencies.
Thank you. Any more questions? If not, then I would like to thank Dr. Mihailidis very much on behalf of the Network for Aging Research for this very inspiring and challenging talk. I think what we've heard is that technology and clever gadgets are not enough in and of themselves. They're a part of the solution, but we need to understand who's going to be using them. We need to understand the delivery models. We need to understand issues around privacy and acceptability. And these are the work in this area and the advances in knowledge in these areas is not something that will just, I think, happen magically. It's where a network like AgeWell has played a critical part and keeps those messages and tweets coming to our people in power so that they can continue to support this type of work. So please join me in thanking Dr. Mihailidis.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul.